Police confronted a black woman in court, but within seconds she dropped him with a judo throw. "You do not get to lecture me about the law." The words ricochet through Department 9 of the Harlem Heights County Supreme Court, sharp enough to silence even the rustling papers. Sergeant Jalen Moore stands in the witness box, his face crimson jaw clenched so tight the tendons in his neck stand out like cables. His finger jabs toward the defense table, where Imani Brooks sits, spine straight, hands folded over a manila folder that contains everything he wishes would disappear. The gallery holds its breath. Someone's phone buzzes a violation of courtroom protocol, but nobody moves to silence it. Judge Camille Harris's gavel hovers mid-air, frozen in the moment before impact, as if even the court itself recognizes something irreversible is about to happen. Imani Brooks' voice cuts through the tension level imprecise. "Your Honor, I would like to remind the witness that under oath his personal feelings about opposing counsel are irrelevant to the facts of this case." Jalen Moore's hands grip the witness box rail. The wood creaks. "Facts you want, facts. How about the fact that you are a—" The slap comes fast. His palm connects with her cheek before the bailiff can move, before the gasps from the gallery can form into screams, before Judge Harris's gavel finally crashes down. The sound echoes like a gunshot in the marble chamber. Imani Brooks's head snaps sideways. She tastes copper bites her inner cheek on the impact. Heat spreads across her face in a starburst pattern, the kind of sting that makes eyes water involuntarily. She does not stumble, does not cry out. Her hand rises slowly to touch her cheek, fingers exploring the heat blooming under her skin around her. The courtroom erupts into chaos, shouting chairs, scraping, someone screaming, "Oh my God!" But all of it sounds distant, muffled as though she is underwater. Jalen Moore lunges forward, his bulk clearing the witness box in a movement that is clumsy with rage. "You think you are better than her." Body responds before conscious thought forms. Weight shifts to the balls of her feet, hands rise, not in defensive cowering, but in precise positioning. She steps inside his reach as he swings again. She catches his extended wrist with her left hand, his elbow with her right. Hip rotation, pull down and forward. His momentum does the rest. The throw is textbook Ippon Seoi Nagi one-arm shoulder throw, executed with a kind of precision that only comes from thousands of repetitions. Jalen Moore flips over her shoulder, his 215 pounds of muscle and fury suddenly weightless, and crashes into the defense table. Papers explode into the air like startled birds. A water pitcher shatters against the floor. The sound of his body hitting wood reverberates through the chamber. Silence descends, sharp and absolute. Then phones emerge from pockets and purses throughout the gallery, a forest of recording devices with little red lights winking like malevolent eyes. The bailiff Darius White finally unfreezes from his position near the judge's bench and rushes toward Imani Brooks, hand hovering over the taser on his belt. "Ma'am, step back, hands where I can see them." Imani Brooks raises both hands, palms open, phone still clutched in her right. The screen shows a voice recording app timestamp running 10, 47, and 33 seconds. Self-defense under New York Penal Code section. "He struck first. Check the video." Darius White's face stiffens. "You just assaulted a police officer. He is a witness, not on duty." Her voice remains level, though her heart hammers against her ribs. "And he battered an officer of the court. That is Penal Code 217. Judge Camille Harris' gavel pounds rhythmically now, trying to restore order to a courtroom that has forgotten what order looks like. "Bailiff, restrain Sergeant Ellis." Imani Brooks approached the bench now. Jalen Moore groans on the floor, rolling onto his side. Blood trickles from his nose where it connected with the table edge. Assistant District Attorney Keisha Robinson, immaculate in her charcoal suit, stands frozen at the prosecution table, her expression cycling through shock calculation and something that might be fear. In the gallery's front row, a man rises slowly from his seat, his suit costing more than most people's monthly rent. Silver hair perfectly styled, Leonard King, Harlem Heights Police Department. His eyes lock on Imani Brooks' face, and neither of them blinks. The moment stretches taut as piano wire. For the first time in 6 years, Imani Brooks smiles at him. 68 hours earlier, her office in downtown Harlem Heights smelled like old paper and fresh coffee, the combination that had defined her life since she had hung her shingle 3 years ago. Sunlight slanted through Venetian blinds, striping the case files stacked in precise rows across her desk. Criminal defense attorneys rarely got corners with views, but Imani Brooks had learned to appreciate the small mercies. The window faced east, giving her morning light, and the building's ancient radiator actually worked in winter. She reviewed the documents spread before her fingers, tracing the timeline she had constructed from witness statements, police reports, and surveillance footage. Timestamps, case number CV2024894, the Williams family versus the city of Harlem Heights and HHPD. The family's matriarch, a housekeeper who had raised 3 children on minimum wage, was suing over her son's arrest. An arrest that had left him with a broken collarbone and a criminal record for resisting an officer. The officer in question. Sergeant Jalen Moore. The name had made her pause when she had first accepted the case. Maya Thompson, her partner in the firm's civil rights practice, had noticed. "You know him. We worked together a long time ago." Imani Brooks had closed the file, then pushed it aside like it was just another piece of paper instead of a door to a past she had sealed shut. Now, 3 days before trial, she could not avoid that door any longer. Her desk drawer held something she had kept for 6 years. A folded newspaper clipping, edges soft from handling headlines screaming, "Officer resigns amid internal investigation." Her own face stared up from the grainy photo, younger, wearing a uniform she had once been proud to put on every morning. Maya appeared in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee, her approach silent on the office's thin carpet. She was a university law graduate with a mind that could dissect precedent like a surgeon with a scalpel. More importantly, she had never once asked Imani Brooks why she had left the force, accepting the non-answer as sufficient. Trial starts Monday. Maya set 1 cup on the desk, then perched on the edge. "Are you ready to face your old precinct?" "I left that life behind." The words came automatically, the same response Imani Brooks had perfected over the years. Maya's eyes flicked to the desk drawer, which had not quite closed all the way. The newspaper clipping peeked out like an accusation. She did not comment, just sipped her coffee and changed the subject. The Williams family was coming in at 2 p.m. Mrs. Williams wanted to go over the timeline again. Imani Brooks nodded, pulling out the evidence photos. She organized them by timestamp first, then by case number, a habit Maya had noticed but never questioned. Most defense attorneys did not bother with such precision, but Imani Brooks cross-referenced every witness statement against building entry logs, security camera footage, and dispatch call records. The devil lived in those details. In the 3-minute gap between when Jalen Moore claimed he had arrived at the Williams home and when the bodycam footage actually began, the coffee shop 2 blocks from the courthouse smelled like burned espresso and anxiety. Imani Brooks met Angela Johnson there at 3 p.m. that afternoon. She chose a table by the window where the light was good for reviewing documents. Angela Johnson was 53, with hands scarred from decades of cleaning other people's homes. Her son Malcolm Johnson sat beside her, arm still in a sling from where it had been wrenched behind his back during the arrest. At the neighboring table, 2 men in casual clothes, off-duty cops, obvious from their posture and the way they positioned themselves facing the door, spoke just loud enough to be overheard. That was the lawyer defending the Williams case. The first one, stocky with a shaved head, did not bother lowering his voice. "He used to be one of us until she went rogue." His companion, thinner, with a pencil mustache, laughed. "Traitor taking gangbanger money." Now Angela Johnson's hand trembled on her coffee cup, the liquid inside creating tiny ripples. Malcolm Johnson's jaw clenched, but Imani Brooks reached across the table and squeezed Angela Johnson's wrist once gently. "Ignore them, we have work to do." She pulled out the incident report, pointing to the discrepancies she had marked. Here, Jalen Moore's report states he responded to a noise complaint at 9:47 p.m., but the computer-aided dispatch printout shows his unit was already on scene at 9:32 p.m. 15 minutes earlier. What does that mean? Angela Johnson's English was good, but legal terminology still gave her trouble. It means he was in your house before he had legal justification to enter. No warrant, no exigent circumstances that would excuse the lack of one. Anything he claims to have observed during those missing minutes, the supposed drug paraphernalia, Malcolm Johnson's alleged hostile behaviors, all fruit of the poisonous tree. Malcolm Johnson leaned forward. "Will the jury understand that?" "They will when I am done explaining it." Imani Brooks kept her voice confident, though juries in police misconduct cases were notoriously reluctant to side against officers. She would need more than legal technicalities. She would need to make them see what really happened that night. The courthouse security checkpoint on Monday morning moved with the efficiency of molasses in January. Darius White worked the main entrance, a 20-year veteran who had outlasted 4 chiefs and countless reforms. He was the kind of bailiff who knew everyone's business, spread it like fertilizer, and enjoyed watching things grow into conflicts. Imani Brooks placed her briefcase and phone in the plastic bin, then stepped through the metal detector clean. She reached for her belongings, but Darius White held her identification card just out of reach, studying it with theatrical slowness. "Oh, sorry, Miss Brooks," his smile showed too many teeth. "Or is it still Officer Brooks, I forget?" The other bailiffs at the checkpoint snickered. Morning light streamed through the courthouse's tall windows, illuminating dust motes in the faces of people waiting in line behind Imani Brooks. All of them were now watching this small power play. "It is Attorney Vaughn." She kept her voice neutral, professional. "I need my identification to enter." Darius White examined the card as though he had never seen a state bar license before. "Right, attorney. Funny how that works. Used to enforce the law, now you are fighting against it." He held the card between 2 fingers, dangling it just beyond her reach. 3 seconds passed, marked by the wall clock's steady tick, before he finally released it. "Here you go, ma'am. Tomorrow's story will show you what happens when silence becomes a crime." Imani Brooks took the card without comment and continued to the elevator bank. Maya Thompson waited there, having arrived earlier through the attorney entrance. "He is giving you trouble, nothing new." But Imani Brooks made a mental note of the interaction, filed it away with the other small indignities that accumulated like interest on a debt nobody wanted to acknowledge. The third-floor hallway buzzed with pre-trial activity attorneys negotiating last-minute plea deals. Families clustered on benches outside courtrooms, the perpetual smell of floor wax and stale coffee filling the air. Assistant District Attorney Keisha Robinson materialized from the crowd like a shark emerging from murky water. She was everything Imani Brooks was not: pedigreed university law degree prominently displayed in her office, never lost a police misconduct case in 7 years, and possessed the kind of confidence that came from knowing the system bent toward her by default. Her suit probably cost more than Imani Brooks' entire wardrobe. Keisha Robinson's smile was professional, polite, and utterly devoid of warmth. "I have reviewed your witness list. I am filing a motion to exclude Dr. Patterson's testimony. His use of force analysis exceeds the scope of expert witness standards under Evidence Code 720. Imani Brooks had expected this. Patterson was her ace, a former HHPD training instructor turned expert witness who could explain to juries exactly how and why certain restraint techniques violated department policy. His credentials were impeccable, 20 years training officers in de-escalation. Then you will have no trouble defending the Dober challenge at tomorrow's hearing. Keisha Robinson's heels clicked away down the corridor, each step precise as a metronome, leaving Imani Brooks standing in the artificial light with a sinking feeling that this case was going to be harder than she had anticipated. That evening, the parking garage's third level smelled like oil and old exhaust. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting stuttering shadows across the concrete. Imani Brooks' 10-year-old Civic waited where she had left it that morning. Except something was wrong. The car sat lower than normal, listing to one side. She approached slowly, phone already out and camera activated. All 4 tires had been slashed clean cuts that suggested a knife rather than random vandalism. Spray paint decorated the hood in angry red letters. Traitor! Her hand stayed steady as she photographed the damage from 6 angles, documenting the cuts the security camera mounted in the corner, its red indicator light conspicuously dark. She opened her phone's notes app, tagged the photos with the parking level timestamp and camera position. The detail work was automatic. Muscle memory from another life. Nobody else occupied this level. The elevator dinged somewhere distant. Imani Brooks stood in the pool of flickering light, looking at the words someone had painted across her car, and felt the familiar weight of isolation settle on her shoulders. This was what happened when you broke ranks. This was the price. She called a rideshare and went home, but sleep did not come easy. Her apartment felt smaller than usual, the walls pressing in with the weight of what she was about to do, walk into a courtroom and call out one of their own, knowing they would all see it as betrayal rather than accountability. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and the kind of heat that made Harlem Heights feel like an oven preheating. Department 9 seated 100 people comfortably, and today every seat was full. Half the gallery wore blue off-duty officers, police union representatives, Jalen Moore's supporters. The other half wore the Williams family's colors, a sea of mourning black mixed with defiant red, the community that had watched too many of their own disappear into the system. Judge Camille Harris presided. A woman in her late 50s with iron gray hair and a reputation for running her courtroom with military precision, she had been on the bench for 15 years and had seen every trick in the book. Her expression suggested she expected to see several more before the day ended. Jalen Moore entered wearing his full-dress uniform, navy blue, with silver badges, ribbons marking commendations earned over 20 years of service. The uniform was technically inappropriate. Witnesses were supposed to appear in civilian clothes to avoid prejudicing the jury. But it was a power move, a statement, "I am the law." Imani Brooks rose. "Your Honor, I move that the witness change into civilian attire. His uniform is prejudicial to the jury and suggests an authority he does not possess in this context." Keisha Robinson stood smoothly, her response prepared. "The witness is a decorated sergeant with an exemplary service record. His uniform reflects his dedication to public safety and is relevant to his credibility." Judge Harris considered, her eyes moving between Imani Brooks and Jalen Moore, the calculation visible. Ruling for Imani Brooks would alienate every police officer in the gallery, but ruling for Keisha Robinson would tacitly endorse the intimidation tactic. Politics won overruled. Continue Imani Brooks. The jury filed in 12 faces representing a cross-section of Harlem Heights County, though Imani Brooks noted that voir dire had somehow eliminated every potential juror who would express strong opinions about police accountability. Funny how that worked. Jalen Moore settled into the witness box with the ease of someone who had testified hundreds of times. He understood the performance aspect, how to angle his body toward the jury, how to make eye contact without seeming aggressive. Keisha Robinson walked him through his background, 22 years on the force commendations for bravery training in crisis intervention and de-escalation. By the time she finished the direct examination, Jalen Moore looked like a candidate for sainthood. Imani Brooks stood for cross-examination, gathering her notes with deliberate care. The courtroom quieted that particular hush that precedes confrontation. "Good morning, Sergeant Moore. her voice carried easily in the marble chamber. You responded to a noise complaint at 4738 Jackson Avenue on March 14, 2023. Is that correct? Jalen Moore's jaw set slightly, but his voice remained professional. That is correct. Your incident report states you arrived at 9:47 p.m. She held up the document, letting the jury see the timestamp. Can you confirm that is what you wrote? Yes. In this report, it was filed. How long after the incident? Standard protocol is within 24 hours. I filed it the following morning. Imani Brooks walked to the evidence table and picked up a different document. This is the computer-aided dispatch printout obtained through a New York Public Records Act request, number 24/1937. According to this official log, your unit was already on scene at 9:32 p.m., 15 minutes earlier than your report claims. Can you explain the discrepancy? Jalen Moore's hands gripped the witness box rail. A muscle twitched in his jaw. Clerical error. Must have transposed the numbers when I was writing up the report. A clerical error. Imani Brooks let the words hang in the air. Sergeant, you have testified? You filed thousands of incident reports over your career. How many of those contained clerical errors regarding your arrival time? Objection relevance. Keisha Robinson was on her feet. Goes to credibility, Your Honor. If the witness routinely makes errors in official documents, the jury should know. Judge Camille Harris nodded. Overruled. Answer the question. Sergeant. Jalen Moore's face had gone from its normal tan to an unhealthy red. I do not keep track of minor errors. Minor errors. Imani Brooks approached the witness box close enough to see the sweat beginning to bead on his upper lip. During those missing 15 minutes between 9:32, when you actually arrived, and 9:47, when you claim you arrived. Where were you? I was assessing the situation from outside for 15 minutes. It is called officer safety. We do not just rush into unknown situations. Yet there is no record of you calling for backup during this assessment period. No radio communication logged. No notation in your report about what you observed during these 15 minutes that required such careful evaluation. She paused, letting the jury absorb this. Or were you inside the Williams home without a warrant? Jalen Moore's knuckles went white on the rail. I had probable cause to enter. Under what statute exigent circumstances? Please cite the specific legal standard for exigent circumstances in a noise complaint case. Keisha Robinson stood. Objection calls for a legal conclusion. He is claiming legal justification for entering a home without a warrant. Your Honor, I am entitled to probe the basis of that claim. Judge Camille Harris's expression suggested she knew exactly what game was being played, but had to allow it anyway. Overruled. Answer the question. Jalen Moore's face cycled through several shades of red before settling on purple. I do not have to justify my actions to you. Actually, under oath you do. Imani Brooks' voice remained level conversational even. Let me help you. New York Penal Code Section 1524 requires that exigent circumstances exist when officers enter without a warrant. These circumstances must involve immediate danger to life or serious damage to property. A noise complaint, neighbors reporting loud music, does not meet that threshold, does it? You do not get to lecture me about the law. Jalen Moore stood up in the witness box, his bulk making the elevated platform seem suddenly smaller. The bailiff stirred, but did not move to intervene. Judge Harris's gavel cracked once. Sergeant, sit down! But Jalen Moore was past hearing, his finger jabbed toward Imani Brooks like a weapon. She is the one who should be on trial. She destroyed evidence in the Kaminsky case. The courtroom erupted. Spectators shouted. The jury shifted uncomfortably. Judge Harris pounded her gavel repeatedly, the sound like gunfire in the chaos. Imani Brooks stood perfectly still. Her expression unchanged, though her pulse hammered in her throat. Your Honor, she said calmly. I move to strike that statement as non-responsive and defamatory. Granted. Judge Harris's voice cut through the noise. The jury will disregard the witness's last statement. Sergeant Moore, you will sit down immediately or I will hold you in contempt. But Jalen Moore was stepping down from the witness box, moving with a kind of purpose that made the bailiff finally reach for his radio. Darius White spoke rapidly into the device, calling for backup, but his eyes tracked Jalen Moore's approach toward the defense table with something that looked like anticipation. Jalen Moore reached the railing separating the well of the court from the gallery. He did not stop, just vaulted over it in a movement that was surprisingly agile for a man his size. Papers scattered, someone screamed, and suddenly he was 3 feet from Imani Brooks, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath and see the individual broken capillaries in his bloodshot eyes. Imani Brooks returned to the stand. Her voice did not waver, though every instinct screamed at her to step back, to create distance, to protect herself, or what. His hand rose, and Imani Brooks saw it coming, saw the arc of his palm sweeping toward her face. She saw it but did not move, because sometimes you had to let people reveal exactly who they were. The slap connected with enough force to snap her head sideways. The taste of copper flooded her mouth. The gallery's gasp sounded distant, muffled by the ringing in her ears. She touched her cheek slowly, feeling the heat blooming under her fingers, and in that moment of stillness before everything accelerated into chaos, she thought about how many times this must have happened to people who did not know how to fight back. Jalen Moore lunged again, his rage making him clumsy. You think you are better than me. You destroyed your career, and now you want to destroy mine. Her body moved without conscious thought, years of training overriding fear. She stepped inside his reach as he swung, caught his extended wrist with her left hand, his elbow with her right hip rotation clean and fast, pull down and forward. His weight became leverage momentum, became vulnerability. The throw was perfect. Ippon Seoi Nagi one-arm shoulder throw. Jalen Moore, 220 pounds of muscle and fury, flipped over her shoulder and crashed into the defense table. The water pitcher shattered. Papers exploded like confetti. His nose connected with the table edge with a crack that made several jurors wince. The silence that followed was absolute, the kind of quiet that only comes after violence has disrupted civilization's thin veneer. Then phones emerged from pockets throughout the gallery, a forest of recording devices with blinking red lights. Darius White rushed forward, hand hovering over his taser. Ma'am, step back. Hands where I can see them. Imani Brooks raised both hands, palms open. Her phone was still in her right hand, the voice recorder app showing a timestamp 10:00 a.m. Self-defense under New York Penal Code Section 692. He struck first. Check the video. Darius White's face worked through several expressions before settling on defensive anger. You just assaulted a police officer. He is a witness not on active duty and he battered an officer of the court. That is Penal Code 217. She kept her voice level, though her hands had started shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. I request that the assault be documented in the court record. Judge Camille Harris' gavel came down like thunder. Bailiff restrain Sergeant Moore. Imani Brooks approached the bench. Keisha Robinson, you too. The sidebar conference happened in whispers harsh enough to carry violence of their own. Judge Harris leaned forward, her voice low but furious. Counselor, you just threw a police officer in my courtroom. He struck me first. Your Honor, I used proportional force to prevent further battery. Imani Brooks's cheek throbbed, but she kept her posture straight. Darius White's face worked through several expressions before settling on defensive anger. You just assaulted a police officer. He is a witness not on active duty, and he battered an officer of the court. That is Penal Code 217. She kept her voice level, though her hands had started shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. I request that the assault be documented in the court record. Judge Camille Harris's gavel came down like thunder. Bailiff restrained Sergeant Moore. Imani Brooks approached the bench. "Keisha Robinson, you too." The sidebar conference happened in whispers harsh enough to carry violence of their own. Judge Harris leaned forward, her voice low but furious. "Counselor, you just threw a police officer in my courtroom. He struck me first. Your Honor, I used proportional force to prevent further battery." Imani Brooks's cheek throbbed, but she kept her posture straight. 2 million forum thread with 12,000 upvotes and counting. The headlines varied: lawyer Judo throws cop in court. Imani Brooks said, "Check the tape. Harlem city attorney versus police sergeant, full breakdown." But the message was universal. This was exactly the kind of courtroom drama people craved. Olivia Bennett's phone kept buzzing with media requests. Global News wanted an interview. So did national broadcast. Local news was offering exclusive rights if she would go on tonight. No comment. Imani Brooks stared at the phone screen, showing her own face frozen in the moment after the slap. Jaw set, eyes hard. She barely recognized herself. This is good for the case. Public opinion matters. The DA will feel pressure. Public opinion does not win trials. Olivia, evidence does. Imani Brooks handed the phone back. We focus on proving Jalen Moore violated the Peterson family's rights. Everything else is noise. But noise had a way of becoming signal. By the time Imani Brooks left the courthouse at 7 that evening, reporters swarmed the front steps. Microphones extended like accusatory fingers. She pushed through the crowd without comment. Head down, briefcase held in front of her like a shield. At the curb, a black town car idled with tinted windows that reflected the dying sunlight. As Imani Brooks passed the rear window, lowered with an electric whisper. Chief Malik Jefferson sat in the back seat. Silver hair, perfect, expensive suit unmarred by the heat. He looked like money and power and everything Imani Brooks had walked away from. A moment. She should have kept walking, should have flagged down the rideshare she had called and disappeared into the city's evening traffic. Instead, she found herself approaching the car, drawn by the gravity of unfinished business. Chief, that was quite a performance today. His smile was thin, humorless. Self-defense, they are calling it. Impressive how you managed to throw a man twice your size without breaking a sweat. He struck first. The video is clear. Oh, I have seen the video. Everyone has seen it. That is the problem. Jefferson's fingers drummed on the leather armrest. You are making Jalen Moore look like a fool. Making the department look bad by extension. That is never going to be your strong suit. Understanding consequences. The words carried weight beyond their surface meaning. They both knew what he was referring to. The case that had ended her career in blue and started her career in courtrooms. Jalen is a hothead, but he is my hothead. Jefferson's voice dropped, became almost conversational. Drop the case. Walk away from the Peterson family. There are other attorneys who can handle their complaint. Not a chance. His smile faded. Then I guess we will see each other again soon. Imani, you are not wearing the uniform anymore. You do not have the protection you think you do. The window rose, cutting off any response. The town car pulled into traffic, leaving Imani Brooks standing on the curb as the sun set. And the city's lights began their nightly bloom. She watched them disappear around a corner, then finally climbed into her rideshare. That night, her apartment felt smaller than usual, the walls pressing in with the weight of everything unspoken. She tried to work on trial prep, reviewing depositions and cross-examination notes, but the words blurred together. Finally, she gave up and opened her laptop to check email. The message arrived at 11:03 p.m. Sender listed as Friendly Advice 2022 at Proton Mail. Kometsu, no subject line. The body contained 3 sentences. Lawyers who make cops look bad have accidents. Check your car's brake lines or do not. Your choice. Imani Brooks stared at the screen, reading the words 3 times. Then she took a screenshot, forwarded it to Olivia Bennett with a timestamp, and added a single line of her own preserve. This it might be evidence later. She closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of her living room, listening to the city's nighttime symphony sirens in the distance, neighbors arguing through thin walls, the steady drip of a faucet that needed fixing. Tomorrow, Laura Mitchell would try to turn this into a mistrial. The police union would hold a press conference denouncing her, and somewhere in the city, people she had once called colleagues were deciding how far they would go to protect one of their own. Sleep came eventually restless and populated by dreams of courtrooms that stretched into infinity, witnesses who spoke in languages she could not understand, and the sound of a gavel that never quite fell. Tuesday morning brought Laura Mitchell's counter-offensive. She had requested a meeting at the DA's office, unusual since defense attorneys rarely visited the prosecution's territory. But Imani Brooks agreed sometimes you had to walk into the lion's den to understand what you were really fighting. The district attorney's building occupied a prime piece of downtown real estate, all glass and steel reflecting the morning sun. Claire's office was on the 8th floor corner view, decorated with the kind of tasteful minimalism that screamed expensive interior designer. Diplomas lined one wall, university undergrad, university law clerkship, with a 9th Circuit judge. The resume of someone who had never had to fight for anything. Laura Mitchell sat behind her desk, fingers steepled expression. Neutral. I am offering a deal. Dismiss the Peterson case. In exchange, we will not press charges against you for assaulting Sergeant Jalen Moore. Imani Brooks remained standing, briefcase in hand. He assaulted me. You have the video from multiple angles. We have a video of you throwing a police officer through a table. Interpretation depends on whose lawyer is better. Laura Mitchell's smile was practiced, professional. I am very good at my job. Is that a threat? It is a reality check. The state bar does not like attorneys who get physical in court. Even in self-defense, an investigation could take months. During that time, you would be suspended from practice. Your clients would suffer. Your firm would struggle. She paused, letting the implications settle. Or you could walk away from one case and get back to your life. Imani Brooks' hands tightened on her briefcase handle. I am not interested in deals that require me to abandon my clients. Then I hope you have good malpractice insurance. Laura Mitchell stood, signaling the meeting's end. One more thing, your Metro City Police Department personnel file. There is an irregularity review pending. Someone requested it under the New York Public Records Act. Thought you would want to know. The words landed like a punch. Personnel files were supposed to be confidential unless specifically requested, and even then, certain sections remained redacted to protect privacy. Someone digging into her file meant someone wanted to know why she had left the force. Who requested it? Laura Mitchell's smile turned sharp. Anonymous requester, but Chief Malik Carter copied me on the release authorization. Funny how that works. Imani Brooks left without another word, taking the elevator down 8 floors, while her mind raced through implications. If they released her file, the Kamari case would become public. The complaint she had filed against Malik Carter would be exposed, and the reason Jalen Moore had been assigned to investigate, and why her complaint had been ruled unfounded, would become tomorrow's headlines. That night, alone in her apartment, Imani Brooks opened the desk drawer she had been avoiding. Beneath the newspaper clipping announcing her resignation lay something she had not looked at in years. A photograph. Her age, 29, in full New York Police Department uniform, standing beside Jalen Moore, both smiling proud, wearing matching ribbons for Officer of the Year nominees, 2018. The door opened without her hearing it. Olivia Bennett stood in the entrance, concern etched on her face. You never told me you worked together. It was a long time ago. Imani Brooks closed the drawer, but the damage was done. The past had finally caught up. What happened? The question hung in the air, heavy with 6 years of silence. Imani Brooks looked at her partner, her friend, the woman who had never once pushed for answers. She clearly deserved it. The words came slowly, carefully, like removing shrapnel from a wound that had never properly healed. I learned that some partners care more about the badge than the oath. Olivia Bennett waited understanding. Sometimes that was all the explanation someone could give. She did not press, just nodded once, and left closing the door quietly behind her. Imani Brooks sat in the darkness, the photograph still visible in her mind's eye. She and Jalen Moore, standing shoulder to shoulder, believing they were on the same side before she had learned that loyalty could be weaponized. That silence could be demanded. Choosing truth over brotherhood made you a traitor to everything the uniform represented. The Federal Express delivery arrived Wednesday afternoon, thick manila envelope, heavy with the weight of official documents. Imani Brooks signed for it, carried it to her desk, and opened it with the care of someone defusing a bomb. New York Public Records Act request number 2-194 fulfilled. Jalen Moore's internal affairs file, heavily redacted with black bars covering names and sensitive details, but enough remained visible to paint a picture. 2017 complaint, number 17-0483, use of excessive force. Finding unfounded complainant failed to appear for follow-up interview. 2018 complaint, number 18-1122, racial profiling. During traffic stop, finding exonerated officer actions consistent with department policy. 2019 complaint, number 19-2657, evidence tampering, finding sustained. Jalen Moore received written reprimand. Details redacted. Investigating officer redacted. Imani Brooks stared at that last entry. They had redacted the investigating officer's name, which was unusual. Internal affairs files were typically public record unless the officer themselves was the subject of investigation. She flipped through the file looking for the actual investigation report, but those pages were missing entirely. Just the cover sheet with the case number and final disposition. Olivia Bennett appeared over her shoulder. They redacted the investigator's name. That was not standard procedure. No, it is not. Imani Brooks made a note in her phone unless the internal officer was the subject of another investigation or unless someone with authority wanted to hide their involvement, or both. Olivia Bennett pulled up a chair. What case was this evidence tampering in 2019? 2019, the year Imani Brooks had left the force. The year of the Kamari shooting. The year everything had fallen apart. She did not say it aloud, but Olivia Bennett was smart enough to read between the lines. The courthouse archives occupied the basementa maze of filing cabinets and bankers' boxes that smelled like old paper and fluorescent lights. Donna Freeman had worked as chief clerk for 30 years, long enough to remember when everything was still on paper and you could lose a file just by misfiling it in the wrong drawer. Imani Brooks presented her subpoena for Jalen Moore's body cam footage from the Peterson incident. Donna Freeman examined it with the careful attention of someone who had seen every trick attorneys used to access records they were not entitled to. This will take a few days. She stamped the subpoena with a date 3 business days out. Bodycam footage was now stored off-site budget cuts. New York Freedom of Information law, FOIL, requires agencies to respond within 10 days. Imani Brooks kept her voice polite but firm. I am within my rights to request expedited processing. Donna Freeman's expression shifted, became more guarded. She glanced around the empty archive room, then leaned closer, lowering her voice. Between you and me, someone already requested this footage last week, but the file came back corrupted. Whole thing's just static in black frames. Who requested it? Can't say officially. Donna's eyes flicked to the doorway, checking for eavesdroppers, but they had an internal affairs badge. She slid a post-it note across the counter, then busied herself with filing papers as though the conversation had never happened. Imani Brooks pocketed the note without looking at it, thanked Donna, and left. Only when she was back in the parking garage, a different one this time after the tire-slashing incident, did she read what Donna had written. I, Sergeant Cruz, the same woman who'd interviewed her after the courtroom incident, the same person who'd mentioned Jalen Moore's previous excessive force complaints. Imani Brooks pulled out her phone and dialed the number Cruz had given her. 3 rings. Cruz Sergeant. It's Imani Brooks. I understand you requested body cam footage from the Peterson incident. A pause long enough for Imani to hear paper rustling in the background. Yeah, I did as part of my investigation into the courtroom assault, and yeah, it came back corrupted. Convenient, right? Who handles digital evidence storage evidence control unit? But here's the thing. Cruz's voice dropped, became more careful. I checked the chain of custody log. The footage was accessed 3 times after the incident, twice by the ECU supervisor doing routine maintenance, once by someone with admin override credentials. Imani Brooks' pulse quickened. Who has admin override captains and above deputy chiefs and the chief himself? Another pause. Look, I shouldn't be telling you this. If anyone finds out I'm feeding you information, they won't, but I need that chain of custody log. Can't do that without a subpoena. But hypothetically, if someone were to file the right request with the right case number, those logs would have to be produced. They spoke for another few minutes, careful to keep the conversation just on the legal side of proper procedure. When Imani Brooks hung up, she had a clear picture someone high up in the department had accessed Jalen Moore's body cam footage and either corrupted it or replaced it with a corrupted file. The original was gone, disappeared into the digital void, where evidence went to die. Olivia Bennett met her at the coffee shop near the courthouse later that afternoon. Laptop open, expression grim. I've been doing research on Leonard King. She turned the screen so Imani Brooks could see the spreadsheet she'd created, campaign contributions cross-referenced with city contract awards, a web of money and influence stretching back 5 years. 2020. King donates $65,000 to the mayor's re-election campaign. 6 months later, West Harlem division budget increases 8%. 2022, King's wife's non-profit receives $225,000 in city grants for youth outreach programs. 3 months later, King promoted to chief. 2023, West Harlem Division Union, where King serves as board member, donates $85,000 to Laura Davies' campaign for district attorney. It's all legal, Imani Brooks said, tracing the connections with her finger barely. But it shows why Laura Davis is protecting him. She owes him. The union backed her campaign. They can tank her re-election just as easily. Maya Thompson closed the laptop. This isn't just about Jalen Moore's temper. It's about protecting a system that protects itself. That night, working late in her office, Imani Brooks received another email. This time, the sender was listed as protect and serve the truth at protonmail.com. No subject line, just an attachment. Maya complaint 2019 2657 unredacted PDF. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the file. The full complaint appeared on screen. Nothing redacted, everything exposed to light for the first time in 6 years. Complainant Officer Imani Brooks badge, number 5582, subject, Chief Leonard King. Badge number 10001, allegation, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to conceal evidence in officer-involved shooting case number 2019-0856, investigating officer Sergeant Jalen Moore, finding complainant failed to provide sufficient evidence to support allegations, complaint unfounded. Officer Brooks placed on administrative leave pending psychiatric evaluation per recommendation of investigating officer. The words blurred. Imani Brooks read them twice, 3 times, each repetition driving the knife deeper. Jalen Moore had investigated her complaint against King. Jalen Moore, who'd been King's golden boy, who'd testified at her administrative hearing, that she was unstable, suffering from burnout, seeing conspiracies where none existed. Maya Thompson's voice came from the doorway. "Jalen Moore investigated your complaint against Leonard King." Imani Brooks looked up, not realizing her partner had entered. "That's why I left." She forwarded the email to Maya, then sat back in her chair and let herself remember what she'd spent 6 years trying to forget. Night Shift Central Precinct, September 14, 2019. Domestic disturbance call at 1247 East 125th Street. Imani Brooks had responded with Terence Grant, a senior officer known for his aggressive tactics and ability to close cases quickly. Through arrests that looked good on paper but fell apart in court. They arrived to find a teenager, Malik Carter, 14 years old, standing in his living room. Family argument over curfew, nothing criminal, but Grant saw something else, a young black male in a neighborhood he deemed high crime, and that was all the justification he needed. The shooting happened fast. Malik reached for his phone to call his mother. Grant shouted gun and fired twice, sent her mass textbook academy shots. Malik collapsed, blood spreading across the hardwood floor in a pattern that would haunt Imani Brooks' dreams for years. She called for paramedics, immediately started CPR, tried to keep pressure on the wounds, but Malik was already gone. And as she worked, she watched Grant through her peripheral vision, watched him pull something from his pocket and place it near Malik's outstretched hand. A knife. Drop knife in cop parlance, the kind of insurance officers carry to justify questionable shoots. "Grant, what are you doing?" she demanded. He looked up at her eyes, flat and hard. "Securing the scene." "That's all. Just securing the scene." "That's a drop knife. I am calling this in." "You're not calling anything in." The kid grabbed for a weapon. "I defended myself." That's the story. But Imani Brooks' body cam had recorded everything. She'd worn it on her chest, angled to capture Grant's movements. She had proof. So she'd gone to Leonard King, filed a formal complaint, believed naively, stupidly that evidence and procedure would lead to justice. Instead, King had assigned Jalen Moore to investigate her partner, the person she trusted with her life on countless calls. And Jalen Moore had done exactly what was expected, Barrett. The complaint questioned her stability, recommended psychiatric evaluation as a way to discredit anything she said. 3 weeks later, Imani Brooks had resigned rather than face the humiliation of forced leave. She'd surrendered her badge, walked out of the Central Precinct. She'd called home for 5 years and started over as a defense attorney, fighting the system from the outside, since she couldn't change it from within. Now, sitting in her office with Maya Thompson reading over her shoulder, Imani Brooks felt the full weight of that decision. She'd saved herself, but abandoned Malik Carter's family to a system that had buried the truth. Terence Grant had retired to Arizona with full pension. Leonard King had been promoted. Jalen Moore had continued his career as though he'd done nothing wrong. "Tomorrow," Imani Brooks said quietly, "tomorrow we tell the court everything." Maya Thompson looked up, eyes wide. "You're going to reveal you were a cop in the middle of trial." "Yes," Imani Brooks said. "I am going to reveal that Jalen Moore has a history of protecting people who commit crimes under color of authority. That 6 years ago, he buried evidence in a shooting death. He is not a credible witness because he is willing to lie to protect the department." Imani Brooks closed the laptop. "Yes. I am going to explain why I know all this. They'll try to discredit you. Say you have a grudge. I do have a grudge. I have a grudge against officers who think the badge makes them untouchable." Imani Brooks stood gathering her files. "But I also have evidence, and tomorrow everyone's going to see it." Thursday morning dawned gray and overcast, the marine layer thick enough that downtown Harlem Heights disappeared into mist. Imani Brooks dressed carefully. Charcoal suit, white blouse, her best courtroom armor. She checked her reflection, once smoothed hair that didn't need smoothing, and grabbed the file that would either end her career or cement it. The courthouse felt different today, charged with electricity that made the air crackle. Word had spread about yesterday's sidebar conference about Laura Davies' mistrial motion about something big happening. The gallery filled early reporters claiming seats in the back, sketch artists setting up pads and pencils. Jalen Moore sat at the prosecution table, jaw set a bandage covering the cut on his nose from where it had connected with the table. He did not look at Imani. Brooks did not acknowledge her existence, but his hands gripped the armrests of his chair hard enough that his knuckles went white. Leonard King occupied the same seat as before. Front row of the gallery, perfectly positioned to intimidate. He had brought reinforcements, 3 other men in expensive suits, probably union lawyers here to protect their investment. Judge Camille Harris called the court to order at precisely 9:00 a.m. We're back on the record in Peterson versus City of Harlem Heights. Before we address the mistrial motion, does either side have any preliminary matters? Imani Brooks stood. Your Honor, I have new evidence to present that bears directly on the witness's credibility. Laura Davies shot to her feet. Objection. We are in the middle of cross-examination. New evidence should have been disclosed during discovery. This evidence became available only last night, Your Honor. I move to introduce Exhibit D53. Judge Harris gestured her forward. Imani Brooks approached with a single document, placing it on the bench with the care of someone handling explosives. The judge read it, her expression cycling through surprise, confusion, and finally a hardness that suggested she understood exactly what she was looking at. Counselor, this is your personnel file from West Harlem Division? Yes, Your Honor. Imani Brooks. Voice carried clearly through the courtroom. I was Officer Imani Brooks, badge 5582 from 2014 to 2019. I served in Central Precinct, specialized in defensive tactics and field evidence collection. The gallery erupted. Reporters scribbled furiously. Jalen Moore's head snapped up, face cycling through shock and fury. Leonard King remained motionless, but something in his eyes suggested he had known this moment would come eventually. You cannot, Jalen Moore started to stand. That is sealed, Judge Camille Harris' gavel cracked like thunder. Sergeant Moore, sit down now, or I will have you removed from this courtroom. Laura Davies recovered faster than Jalen Moore. Your Honor, this revelation is irrelevant to the Peterson case. Miss Clark's employment history. Imani Brooks said, turning to face the courtroom. Addressing everyone is relevant to the witness's credibility, Your Honor. Imani Brooks continued. Jalen Moore was my training officer in 2017, and in 2019 he was the internal affairs investigator who buried my complaint against Chief Leonard King. She walked to the evidence table and produced another document. I move to introduce Exhibit D48, Internal Affairs Complaint 2019-22657, unredacted version. The projector screen flickered to life. The complaint appeared, every word visible, every detail exposed. Imani Brooks read aloud, her voice steady, despite her racing pulse. On September 14, 2019, Officer Imani Brooks reported observing Officer Derek Collins planting evidence at the scene of an officer-involved shooting. The victim, Malcolm Johnson, age 14, was unarmed. Officer Brooks' complaint alleged that Chief Leonard King ordered the cover-up and directed the investigating officer to rule the complaint unfounded. The gallery's gasp was audible, a collective intake of breath that sucked oxygen from the room. Angela Johnson covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming. The reporters were no longer just scribbling. They were texting, calling editors, breaking news in real time. Jalen Moore was assigned to investigate. His finding unfounded, no evidence to support the claim. But here's what he omitted from his report. Imani Brooks pulled up another file on the screen. Last night I received a copy of my own body cam footage from September 14, 2019, the footage that was supposedly lost during the IA investigation. Laura Davies was on her feet. Objection. Chain of custody hasn't been established. This could be... I'm not offering it as evidence in this trial. Your Honor, Imani Brooks said, keeping her eyes on the judge. I am using it to impeach the witness' credibility. If Sergeant Moore lied in his investigation of my complaint, the jury deserves to know he is capable of falsifying official reports." Judge Camille Harris leaned back in her chair, fingers pressed to her temples. The legal calculation was visible on her face, allow this, and shed open a can of worms that would consume weeks of court time. Deny it, and she'd be protecting a potentially corrupt officer. "I'll allow it," she said finally, "but tread carefully. Counselor, you are on thin ice." The screen went dark, then flickered to life with body cam footage. The timestamp in the corner read September 14th, 2019. 101-16-21-34-17. Imani Brooks' voice provided narration. "This is my body cam from the night Malcolm Johnson was killed. Timestamp 2134. My cruiser arrives at 1247 East 125th Street." The footage showed Imani Brooks' perspective approaching a modest home. Derek Collins' cruiser already parked at the curb. The audio picked up shouting inside family argument. Nothing violent. 21:35:08. I enter the scene and observe Officer Collins in the living room with the victim. The screen showed Malcolm Johnson, baby-faced and terrified, standing with his hands raised. Collins had his weapon drawn, shouting commands. Malcolm was reaching for his pocket, slowly, carefully pulling out a cell phone. "Gun." Collins' voice cracked through the speakers. 2 shots. Malcolm collapsed. The footage shook as Imani Brooks rushed forward, started CPR. Blood pooled on the hardwood floor, spreading in concentric circles. 1:20:35:14. Imani Brooks' voice was quiet now, tight with remembered trauma. Officer Collins retrieves an object from his pocket and places it near the victim's hand. The footage showed it clearly. Collins crouching, pulling out a folding knife, positioning it near Malcolm's. Outstretched fingers making it look like the teenager had been armed. "Collins." "What are you doing?" Imani Brooks' voice, on the tape sharp with shock. "Securing the scene." "That's all. Just securing the scene. That's a drop knife. I'm calling this in." The footage ended there, cut off as Imani Brooks reached to disable her body cam standard procedure during officer-involved shootings, supposedly to protect officers' privacy during the aftermath. But the damage was done. Everyone in the courtroom had seen exactly what happened. The silence was absolute crushing. Then Jalen Moore exploded from his chair, pointing at Imani Brooks with a shaking hand. "You don't understand. Alan ordered me to. Sergeant Moore, do not say another word." Chief Leonard King's voice cut through the courtroom, sharp and commanding. He stood, straightening his jacket. "Not one more word." But Jalen Moore was past listening. 6 years of carrying this secret, watching his department rot from within, being the cleanup man for other people's sins. It all came pouring out in a torrent. "I'm not taking the fall for this alone." He turned to face King, and in that moment, he looked less like an officer and more like a drowning man, grabbing for anything that might float. "You told me to bury her complaint. You said Collins was retiring anyway, that it didn't matter. I said enough, Sergeant." Judge Camille Harris' gavel came down repeatedly. "Order. Everyone will be seated immediately." But the courtroom had descended into chaos. Reporters were streaming toward the exits, phones pressed to their ears. The Johnson family was weeping. 1:04. Embracing Moore and King were locked in a staring contest that held 6 years of threats, leverage, and consequences. Imani Brooks stood at the defense table watching it all unfold, and felt something she had not experienced in years. Vindication, not victory. The fight was far from over, but the simple satisfaction of knowing she had been right to speak up, right to fight, right to refuse the lie that made everyone else's life easier. "Your Honor," she said quietly, cutting through the noise, I have one more piece of evidence to present. The courtroom's chaos crystallized into a single point of focus as every eye turned toward Imani Brooks. She stood at the defense table, hand resting on her briefcase, where one final piece of evidence waited, the recording that would either cement Jalen Moore's confession or give Chief Leonard King enough room to escape. Judge Camille Harris' gavel fell 3 more times before the noise subsided enough for her voice to carry. Miss Brooks, the court will hear your additional evidence, but I am warning you, one more disruption like this and I am clearing the gallery. Understood. Yes, Your Honor, Imani. Brooks replied, pulling out her phone, the same device that had recorded Moore's initial assault. I request judicial permission to unseal a recording I made 3 days ago under New York Penal Code Section 6, the exception for evidence of violent felonies. Laura Thompson was already shaking her head. New York is a 2-party consent state. Any recording made without is inadmissible. Under the exception for evidence of violent felonies, Imani Brooks said, turning to face Laura directly. I had reasonable suspicion that Chief King was conspiring to obstruct justice. The recording was made in furtherance of documenting that crime. Judge Harris held out her hand. When and where was this recording made? Tuesday evening, approximately 7:05 p.m., in the courthouse basement parking structure. Chief King approached me immediately after I left the building, Imani Brooks said, handing over her phone display, showing the audio file with timestamp and duration. 3 minutes 47 seconds. The conversation was initiated by him, not me. I activated my phone's recorder when he made what I perceived as a threat. Judge Harris connected the phone to the courtroom sound system. Static crackled through the speakers. Then voices emerged with surprising clarity. The acoustics of the parking garage had created an echo that made both speakers sound larger than life. King's voice came first, measured and confident, Miss Brooks. A momentary pause, footsteps approaching, then Imani. Brooks' voice, Chief, that was quite a performance today. Self-defense, they're calling it. Impressive how you managed to throw a man twice your size without breaking a sweat. He struck first. The video's clear. Oh, I have seen the video. Everyone has seen it. That is the problem. You are making Jalen Moore look like a fool, making the department look bad by extension. Another pause, the sound of a car door closing in the distance, then Leonard King's voice, again closer now. Jalen Moore is a hothead, but he is my hothead. Drop the case. Walk away from the Malik Carter family. Not a chance. King's laugh was hollow, devoid of humor. Then I guess we will see each other again soon. And Imani Brooks, you are not wearing the uniform anymore. You do not have the protection you think you do. The recording should have ended there, but it continued. Fabric rustling, suggesting movement. Then King's voice dropped lower, became almost conversational in its threat. Jalen Moore will not be the last person you lose. If Sergeant Simone Lewis keeps digging, she might find her evidence room access revoked permanently. These things happen when people do not understand how the system works. Silence stretched for 5 seconds. Then Imani Brooks' voice. Are you threatening an internal affairs investigator? I am explaining reality. The Malik Carter case stays buried. Terrence Grant is retired in Arizona, now living his best life. Even if you somehow found the ballistics report, which you will note it would not match the testimony we gave. We made sure of that. The recording ended with a click. The courtroom remained silent, everyone processing what they had just heard. Leonard King had gone pale, his confident posture crumbling into something that looked like panic, barely contained. Jalen Moore spoke into the silence, his voice cracking. He admitted it. You all heard him admit it. King turned toward Moore, eyes blazing. You do not get to talk. You had one job: keep your mouth shut and let the union handle this, but you could not even do that. Judge Camille Harris' voice cut through their confrontation with the finality of a cell door slamming. Detain Leonard King and Sergeant Jalen Moore. I am ordering an immediate investigation by the Attorney General's office under Government Code Section 12, 5 and 60 pattern of misconduct by peace officers. Darius White stood frozen, caught between his duty as a bailiff and his loyalty to the department that had employed him for 20 years. His hand hovered near his radio, but did not reach for it. "Bailiff, did you not hear my order?" Judge Harris' tone could have frozen fire. Two courthouse deputies, different from the regular bailiffs, appeared from the side entrance. They moved with practiced efficiency toward King and Moore, hands on their restraints. "You have no authority," King said, but his voice lacked conviction. He knew the law as well as anyone. A judge's courtroom was sovereign territory, and she had just heard him confess to conspiracy and obstruction on tape. "I want my lawyer. You will have access to counsel at the appropriate time," Judge Harris signaled to the deputies. California Penal Code Section 135. 1-11, Duro. Destruction or concealment of evidence, Section 182 to conspiracy. You just confessed to both on a recording made in a public space. The deputies approached Leonard King, who stood with rigid dignity as they placed restraints on his wrists. Jalen Moore received the same treatment, though his shoulders slumped in defeat rather than defiance, as they were led toward the holding area. Moore turned back to look at Imani Brooks. "I will testify," he said loud enough for everyone to hear against all of them. "Terrence Grant King, everyone involved in the Malik Carter cover-up." "Talk to your lawyer first," Imani Brooks replied, not unkindly. "You will need one." The gallery erupted into chaos again, but this time Judge Camille Harris allowed it. Reporters streamed toward the exits, already filing stories that would dominate the evening news. Angela Johnson collapsed into her daughter's arms, sobbing with a grief that had finally found validation. Malcolm Johnson stood behind them, face wet with tears, repeating, "He admitted it, Mama. He admitted it, like a prayer." Laura Davies gathered her files with mechanical precision, her face the color of paper. She had tied her career to Leonard King, and that star was now plummeting toward Earth. Her phone buzzed incessantly, probably her office calling for damage control, but she ignored it. In the back row, Sergeant Patricia Cruz caught Imani Brooks' eye and nodded once. A gesture that conveyed respect, solidarity, and perhaps relief. That someone had finally done what she had been too afraid to do herself. Judge Harris waited for the initial surge to subside before speaking. "We are adjourned until Monday morning at 9:00 a.m. Miss Davies, I expect you to inform your office that they will need to assign new counsel to this case. You are recused effective immediately." Laura Davies' mouth opened, then closed. "Your Honor, I have not been. You accepted campaign contributions from the same union that has been protecting these officers. That is enough for a conflict of interest. Consider yourself fortunate. I am not reporting you to the state bar." Judge Harris' gavel fell one final time. "This court is in recess." An hour later, Imani Brooks sat in Judge Harris' chambers. A wood-paneled office that smelled like old books and strong coffee. The judge had removed her robe, revealing a simple blouse and slacks that made her seem more human, less like an instrument of justice descended from on high. That was the most extraordinary use of evidence I have seen in 30 years on the bench, Judge Harris said, pouring 2 cups of coffee from a carafe that had probably been brewing since dawn. She handed one to Imani Brooks. "I am not sure whether to commend you or hold you in contempt. I understand your honor." Imani Brooks accepted the cup, but did not drink. Her hands still trembled slightly from adrenaline. 11407. The State Bar will review your conduct, the recording. The physical altercation with Jalen Moore, even justified, it is highly irregular. Judge Camille Harris settled into her chair with a sigh that spoke of too many years watching justice denied. They will look at whether you violated ethics rules by concealing your prior connection to the case. I disclosed my work history in my conflict check when I took the Malik Carter case. It is in the file. But you did not disclose it to opposing counsel or the court until today. The judge's expression softened slightly. I'm not saying you were wrong ethically or legally. I'm saying you made powerful enemies today, and they will use every tool available to destroy you. They destroyed me 6 years ago. Your Honor, I lost my career, my pension, my faith in the institution I had served. What more can they take? Your law license your freedom if they manufacture charges. Judge Harris leaned forward. I have been in this system long enough to know how it protects itself. Leonard King will lawyer up with the best money can buy. Jalen Moore will cut a deal testify against King in exchange for reduced charges. The union will claim this is an isolated incident. Promise reforms that never materialize, and somewhere in that process, you will become the villain, the vindictive ex-cop with an axe to grind. So I should have stayed silent. Let Jalen Moore's lies stand unchallenged, no. The single word carried the weight of a life spent watching the scales of justice tip in the wrong direction. You should have done exactly what you did, but do not expect gratitude. Do not expect the system to change overnight. Justice is slow, messy, and incomplete, and it will break your heart repeatedly. They sat in silence for a moment, two women on opposite sides of the bench, but the same side of history. Finally, Judge Harris spoke again. For what it's worth, if I had been on the bench in 2019 when you filed that complaint, I would have believed you. The words hit harder than Imani Brooks expected. She blinked rapidly, refusing to let tears form. Thank you, Your Honor. The media circus outside the courthouse was worse than anything Imani Brooks had experienced. News van-lined Harlem Heights streets, 3 deep satellite dishes, extended toward the sky like flowers reaching for sunlight. Reporters surged forward as she emerged, creating a wall of microphones and cameras, shouting questions. Miss Brooks, how long did you plan to reveal your police background? Were you working undercover in the Malik Carter case? Do you think Leonard King will be convicted? What happened to Malik Carter? Maya Thompson appeared at her elbow, creating a path through the crowd with surprising effectiveness for someone who barely topped 5 feet, 4 inches. They made it to Maya's car without Imani. Brooks saying a word, though the cameras tracked them all the way inside. The doors locked. Against the chaos, Maya Thompson finally spoke. Your phone's been ringing non-stop. Every civil rights organization in Harlem Heights wants to talk to you. ACLU, NAACP Legal Defense Fund, 3 different police accountability groups. Tell them I'm not taking calls, Imani Brooks said, closing her eyes and leaning her head against the car window. The glass was cool against her forehead. Global News offered $65,000 for an exclusive interview, Maya added. No, Maya. This is huge, yes, but I don't want to be famous. I want the Peterson family to get justice. I want the Malik Carter family to finally know the truth about what happened to their son. She opened her eyes, watching Harlem Heights blur past as Maya drove. Everything else was noise. They drove in silence for a while, navigating downtown traffic that seemed heavier than usual. Or maybe time had just slowed the way it does after moments of extreme intensity. What happens next? Maya asked as they pulled into their office parking garage. Now we wait. The Attorney General's office will open an investigation. Could take months, Imani replied. Leonard King's lawyers will file every motion imaginable to suppress the recording challenge. The body cam footage discredit Jalen Moore's potential testimony. Imani Brooks unbuckled her seatbelt but didn't move to exit the car. And somewhere in all that, we still have to finish the Peterson trial. 8 months later, the Harlem Heights Times headline read, Former West Harlem Division Chief Leonard King arrested on federal obstruction charges. Below it, in smaller font, Sergeant Jalen Moore enters plea deal, agrees to testify. Imani Brooks sat in her office reading the article on her computer screen, coffee going cold beside her keyboard. The investigation had moved with glacial speed, each development requiring months of document review, witness interviews, and legal maneuvering, but the foundations were finally cracking. According to the article, Chief Leonard King faced 8 federal counts: conspiracy to obstruct justice, deprivation of rights under color of law, witness tampering, and destruction of evidence. The U.S. Attorney's Office, apparently embarrassed by letting a police chief run wild for years, had thrown the book at him. Trial was scheduled for early next year. 10 months away minimum. Jalen Moore had taken a plea deal. As Judge Camille Harris had predicted, in exchange for his testimony against King, his charges were reduced from obstruction to accessory after the fact. He would likely serve 3 to 5 years, lose his pension, and never work in law enforcement again. The article quoted his lawyer saying Jalen Moore was cooperating fully and expressing deep remorse for his role in the cover-up. Officer Terrence Grant had been located in Scottsdale, Arizona, where he'd been enjoying retirement on a full pension. Arizona authorities were processing Harlem Heights' extradition request, though Terrence Grant's lawyers were fighting it. That battle could take another year. Laura Davies had been reassigned from major crimes to misdemeanor prosecution, essentially a demotion without the official paperwork. She had announced last week that she wouldn't seek re-election as district attorney, pouring other opportunities. Her statement had said, which everyone understood meant fleeing before the scandal consumed her completely. Darius White had been transferred to traffic court, as far from high-profile criminal cases as the courthouse could manage. No disciplinary action, no admission of wrongdoing, just a quiet shuffling of pieces on the board. The Peterson case had settled 3 months ago for $5.3 million USD, the city choosing to pay rather than face a jury. After everything that had come out, Angela Johnson had used part of the money to establish a scholarship fund in Malcolm Johnson's name for kids who'd survived police violence. Malcolm himself was back in college studying criminal justice reform. The Morning Mail brought a letter from the California State Bar official seal embossed on expensive letterhead. Imani Brooks opened it with the calm of someone who'd stopped fearing the worst months ago. After thorough review of the complaint filed regarding your conduct in Peterson v. City of Harlem Heights, we find no ethical violations occurred. Your actions were consistent with your duty to zealously represent your client and expose perjured testimony. This matter is closed. She set the letter aside and returned to work. There were other cases now, other families seeking justice, other officers who thought the badge made them untouchable. The phone rang constantly, referrals poured in, and she and Maya Thompson had hired 2 associates just to manage the caseload. But the work felt different now, lighter somehow, despite the weight of new responsibilities. She had proven that the system could be beaten, that silence wasn't the only option, that speaking truth to power sometimes actually worked. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Sergeant Simone Lewis stood in the doorway, no longer in uniform, but in civilian-clothed slacks and a blazer that suggested she was between shifts. Hope I'm not interrupting. Lewis' smile was tentative. I was in the neighborhood. Come in. Imani gestured to the chair across from her desk. Coffee, please. They settled into the kind of careful conversation that happens between people who share history, but not full trust. Lewis had testified before the grand jury investigating Leonard King, had provided crucial corroboration of the chain of custody manipulations, and had finally done what she should have done 6 years ago. I heard you're up for the California Lawyer of the Year award, Lewis said, accepting the cup Imani handed her. I turned it down. Why? Because I'm not doing this for awards. I'm doing it because 6 years ago no one stood with me. I won't let that happen to someone else. Imani Brooks sipped her own coffee, finally cooled to drinkable temperature. Awards don't change the system, evidence does. Testimony does. People willing to risk their careers for the truth, that changes things. Sergeant Simone Lewis was quiet for a moment, studying the photos on Imani's wall, the Peterson family at their settlement press conference, Malik Carter's graduation picture, which his mother had given Imani as a reminder of what they were fighting for. Other clients, other victories, other battles still ongoing. For what it's worth, Lewis said finally. I wish I'd been braver back then. I knew something was wrong with Jalen Moore's investigation. I saw how fast they buried your complaint, but I didn't speak up because I was afraid of ending up like you, pushed out, blacklisted, unemployed. Now I'm thinking about law school. Her smile was self-deprecating. If I can't fix the system from inside the department, maybe I can help fix it from your side of the courtroom. They didn't hug when Lewis left, didn't exchange phone numbers or promise to stay in touch. Just nodded at each other with the understanding that some bridges rebuild slowly, one conversation at a time. That evening, Imani Brooks worked late reviewing discovery documents for a new excessive force case. The office was quiet, just her and the hum of the ancient heating system. Her phone buzzed with an email notification around 7:30 p.m. Sender protect and serve the truth at protonmail.com subject. One more thing. Collins wasn't working alone that night. Check the second body cam, the one from Unit 53. It was on scene before you arrived. Someone else saw everything. Imani stared at the screen, reading the words 3 times. Unit 53. She pulled up the Malik Carter case file, found the dispatch log she had reviewed countless times before. Her eyes tracked down the list of responding units. Unit 53 Sergeant Jalen Moore arrived on scene at 21:31, 3 minutes before Imani's unit, 3 minutes before Terrence Grant had shot Malik Carter. Her mind raced with the implications. If Jalen Moore had been on scene first, he'd witnessed the shooting. He'd watched Grant plant the knife. He hadn't just buried her complaint, later he'd been complicit from the beginning. She picked up her phone, called Maya Thompson. Voicemail. Called Lewis next. The phone rang 4 times before connecting. Cruz, it's Imani Brooks. I need you to check something. Jalen Moore's body cam from the Malik Carter shooting Unit 53. Was it ever submitted into evidence? Rustling papers, keyboard clicks. Give me a minute, Lewis said. Imani waited, pacing the length of her small office, 6 steps forward, 6 back, mind spinning with the weight of what she'd just learned. It shows he activated his camera at 21:28. Sergeant Simone, Lewis said finally. But the footage in evidence only starts at 21:36 after the shooting. The earlier section is listed as corrupted or missing. How much is missing? 8 minutes from arrival on scene until after the shooting. A pause. You thinking what I'm thinking? Jalen Moore witnessed the whole thing. He was there when Terrence Grant shot Malik Carter. He watched Grant plant the knife. He was part of it from the beginning. And when you reported it, he buried the complaint to protect himself, not just Leonard King and Grant. Lewis' voice carried a mix of anger and resignation. Even his plea deal doesn't mention this. He only admitted to covering up the investigation, not being a witness. Can we get the original footage? Doubtful. Evidence control records show the file was accessed by someone with admin override the day before Jalen Moore filed his investigation report. Same pattern as your body cam accessed, corrupted, impossible to recover. Stop pacing. Who had admin override in 2019, captain rank and above, including Moore himself? He'd just been promoted to sergeant, which carried provisional admin access during his first 6 months. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Jalen Moore hadn't just covered up her complaint, they destroyed his own body cam evidence that would have corroborated her account. He'd been protecting himself all along, not just following orders from Leonard King. This changes his plea deal, Imani Brooks said. He testified that he only learned about the knife planting from your complaint. But if he witnessed it, he's been lying under oath to the grand jury. You want to file a motion to revoke his plea agreement? Imani thought about it. Moore was finally cooperating, finally helping to bring down King and Grant. Revoking his deal might make him uncooperative again, potentially scuttling the entire prosecution, but it also meant letting him escape accountability for his role in Malik Carter's death. Justice versus strategy. Truth versus expediency, the eternal calculation that made her hate the system even as she worked within it. "Not yet," she said, finally. "Document everything. If Moore's testimony against King falls apart, or if he tries to minimize his role, well, have ammunition." They hung up. Imani returned to her computer. The anonymous email glowed on her screen, its implications spreading like ripples across water. She saved it to her evidence folder, backed it up to 3 separate cloud services, and emailed copies to Maya Thompson with instructions to preserve it under attorney work product privilege. Then she opened a new document and began drafting a letter to the U.S. Attorney's Office, outlining the missing footage and its implications. Not a formal complaint, not yet, but a warning shot across the bow. Watch Moore. Read carefully. He's given you part of the truth, but not all of it. The Department of Justice had opened a pattern or practice investigation into Harlem Heights Police Department 3 weeks after Leonard King's arrest, released their preliminary report last month. It found systemic deficiencies in accountability mechanisms, evidence handling procedures, and supervision of officers accused of misconduct. The language was bureaucratic, careful, designed to avoid lawsuits, but everyone understood what it meant. The department was corrupt from top to bottom, and reform would take years. The interim chief, a woman brought in from Seattle with a reputation for actually implementing changes, had announced sweeping reforms, mandatory bias training, independent oversight of internal affairs, investigations, body cam footage, preservation protocols requiring multiple redundant backups, and creation of a civilian review board with subpoena power. All good changes on paper. Whether they'd survive contact with reality remained to be seen. Imani Brooks had lived through enough reforms to know that institutions had immune systems ways of absorbing change without actually changing, but she also knew that every small victory mattered. Every officer held accountable created precedent for the next case. Every family that got their day in court, every lie exposed, every corrupt official forced to resign. It all added up slowly over time into something that might eventually resemble justice. Her phone buzzed with a text from Angela Johnson. "Thank you again for everything. Malcolm got accepted to law school. He says he wants to be like you when he graduates." Imani smiled at the screen typed back. "Tell him to be better than me. The next generation always should be. These battles for justice never truly end. They just find new fighters." A week later, Imani stood in the community center 3 blocks from where Malik Carter had died. The building smelled like industrial cleaner and hope, a combination that defined every non-profit struggling to serve neighborhoods the city had forgotten. Angela Johnson had invited her to the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Malik Carter Youth Justice Center, funded by the settlement money, and decorated with photos of Malik's life. A reminder that he had been a person, not just a case number. The crowd was small but determined. Shanice Carter, standing at the front, wore her son's favorite color blue and held a framed photo of him in his 8th grade graduation gown. Shed aged a decade, in 6 years' grief, carving lines around her eyes and mouth that no amount of justice could erase. "This center will teach young people their rights," Shanice said, her voice strong despite the tears streaming down her face. "It will give them resources when they are stopped by police. It will remind them that they matter, that their lives have value, and that they deserve to be safe in their own neighborhoods." Shanice Carter turned to Imani Brooks, still holding Malik's photo. "6 years ago, Officer Brooks tried to tell the truth about what happened to my son. They punished her for it. They tried to silence her. But she never stopped fighting. And because of her, Malik's death finally means something." The applause was subdued, respectful. These were people who understood that victories were partial, that justice was incomplete, that getting this far had required sacrifices most people would never understand. After the ceremony, as attendees mingled over donated cookies and punch, Shanice approached Imani with something in her hand, a small, cream-colored, elegant envelope. "This came in the mail yesterday," Shanice said, pressing it into Imani's hands. Inside was a photograph professional quality showing Malik, at age 13, laughing at something off-camera, his face open and unguarded. Alive in a way the memorial photos could never capture. On the back, Shanice had written, "Thank you for seeing him, not just a case, but a person who deserved better." Imani's throat tightened. She had seen hundreds of crime scene photos, read countless witness statements, reviewed mountains of evidence, until individual details blurred together. But this photo, Malik alive and happy, full of the future that had been stolen from him, reminded her what the whole fight had been about. "He'll keep it," she said quietly as a reminder. That night, Imani returned to her office one more time, unable to sleep, too wired from the day's events. She placed Malik's photo on her desk, next to the Johnson family picture, and the others, a growing gallery of people the system had failed, until someone decided to care. Her computer screen flickered with new email notifications, more case referrals, more families desperate for someone to believe them, more officers hiding behind badges who dishonored the work. The injustice never stopped, but neither did the people willing to fight it. The office felt smaller at this hour. 9:30 on a Thursday night, the building empty except for the janitor 3 floors down. Her desk lamp cast long shadows across stacks of case files, each one representing a disrupted life, a broken family, a system failure. The coffee in her mug had gone cold hours ago. She had stopped tasting it anyway. She opened a new email from an address she didn't recognize, former West Harlem division officer information about evidence tampering. "Can you help?" The cursor blinked in the reply. Field waiting. Imani's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She thought about Judge Camille Harris' warning, "This will break your heart," repeatedly. She thought about Sergeant Simone Lewis' admission. "I wish I'd been braver." She thought about Shanice Carter's tears and Malik's laugh. Imani Brooks read at the email again, the part about the 8 missing minutes of bodycam footage that would never be recovered. She clicked back to the message, examining it more carefully. The sender had included specifics, case numbers, dates, references to unit integrity files that were never supposed to exist according to department policy. These were real details, not the vague conspiracy theories that filled her inbox weekly. This person knew exactly where the bodies were buried. The email continued property room access logs do not match evidence chain of custody records in 3 cases from 2018 through 2020. "I kept copies before I left the department. I know what you did with the Kaminsky case. I know what it cost you. But someone needs to know about this." Imani sat back, the chair creaking under her weight. 3 cases. How many more families had been destroyed? How many more officers had learned that evidence was negotiable, that truth was whatever the report said it was? The Malik Cartertown case had felt enormous, and it was, but it had never been isolated. Corruption did not grow in single incidents. It metastasized through systems protected by silence and institutional indifference. She pulled up a blank spreadsheet and began mapping what little she knew. West Harlem divisioned out 2018 through 2020, 3 cases with mismatched chain of custody. The pattern was familiar. Evidence disappeared at convenient moments, usually right before trial dates or grand jury presentations. Someone inside the property room had been orchestrating this for years. And now, that person wanted out, wanted to talk, wanted someone to care enough to listen. Then she started typing, "Yes, let's talk. Here's my secure number." She hit send and closed the laptop. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new evidence to gather, new lies to expose. Tonight she would take the small victory of having survived another day in a fight that would never truly end. Her phone buzzed again as she gathered her things to leave. A text from an unknown number, Unit 53, was not the only one on scene early. Check the dispatch log for the unit staged nearby during the 15 minutes before the shooting. Someone was listening the whole time. Imani stopped in the doorway, reading the message twice. Staged units officers positioned close to a scene, but not officially responding until called. It was standard procedure for backup, but if someone had been staging nearby during the Malik Carter shooting. She pulled up the dispatch log on her phone, scrolling to September 14, 2019. There it was, the notation she had skipped before focusing only on responding units rather than support positions. Unit 29 staged at East 125th Street, and Arlington supervisor on duty per protocol. Imani Brooks cross-referenced the shift assignments from that night. Unit 29 supervisor in September Section 019 had been the recently promoted Leonard King, not yet chief, but already positioned to control the narrative if anything went wrong. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. King hadn't just covered up the shooting after the fact. He had been there, not at the scene, but close enough to hear everything unfold over the radio, close enough to respond within minutes if needed, close enough to begin managing the story before the body was even cold. She opened the full dispatch record, tracing the radio traffic timestamps, Terence Grant's initial domestic disturbance call at 20,047 hours, Unit 29 marking staged nearby at 20:49, 2 minutes later allegedly for routine supervisory oversight. Grant's shots fired call at 21:01 and then buried in the supplemental notes she had glossed over during her initial review. Unit 29 on scene at 21:03, Sergeant King assuming command 2 minutes from stage position to scene. He had been waiting, listening, ready to control the aftermath. He'd heard Grant's shots fired call. He had heard the panic in the younger officer's voice, the realization that something had gone catastrophically wrong. He had been in position to respond immediately, if needed, to take control of the scene, to manage the cover-up from the beginning. It hadn't been a spontaneous corruption, it had been orchestrated. Imani saved the screenshot, forwarded it to the same evidence folder that grew larger every week. She created a new subfolder labeled Staged Units Pattern Analysis and began pulling dispatch logs from other controversial shootings over the past 5 years. If King had used this tactic once, he had used it before. Supervisors didn't just happen to be staged nearby during officer-involved shootings unless they knew something was about to go wrong or had orchestrated it themselves. The office felt colder suddenly, or maybe that was just the weight of understanding how deep this went. She grabbed her coat, checked that her laptop was secure in her bag, then turned off the lights, locked the office door, and walked out into the Harlem Heights night. The city sprawled before her, 8 million people, and countless stories of injustice waiting to be heard. She was just one attorney with one small practice, but she had proven that one person could make a difference. That truth, properly documented and strategically deployed, could topple corrupt chiefs and force systems to change. The elevator descended slowly. The only sound, the mechanical hum of cables and pulleys. She caught her reflection in the polished doors. 6-year-old circles under her eyes, suit jacket wrinkled from 14 hours in the office. She looked like what she was, someone fighting a war that would outlast her. Imani Brooks reflected on her first year as a defense attorney. She had believed she could save everyone. By her second year, she had learned she could not. By year 3, she had made peace with saving whoever she could whenever she could, knowing that the system would generate new victims faster than she could help them. That was the reality. Judge Camille Harris had tried to prepare her for it. That was what broke your heart repeatedly. Not the losses, but the knowledge that winning one case just meant moving on to the next, while the machine kept grinding. Tomorrow she would follow up on the staged unit lead. She would call the U.S. attorney about Jalen Moore's missing body cam. She would take on the new case from the West Harlem Division whistleblower. The work would never be finished. The system would never stop protecting itself, and she would never stop fighting anyway. Behind her, the lights of the Malik Carter Youth Justice Center glowed in the darkness, a beacon for the next generation of kids who deserved better. Ahead, somewhere in Harlem Heights, evidence was being destroyed, reports were being falsified, and officers were learning that the badge made them untouchable. But they were wrong. The badge didn't protect them anymore, not from her, not from people like Sergeant Simone Lewis, who were finally finding their courage, not from families like the Johnsons who refused to stay silent, not from anonymous sources who fed her breadcrumbs leading deeper into the corruption. She climbed into her car, started the engine, and pulled into traffic. The radio played softly some news anchor, discussing Leonard King's case, speculating about how deep the corruption went, wondering whether this would finally be the scandal that changed things. Imani knew better than to hope for transformation. Systems didn't transform, they were forced to evolve inch by painful inch through the accumulated weight of cases and precedents and people who refused to give up. Real change was measured in decades, not months, in small victories that built on each other, not in dramatic revelations that fixed everything overnight. But tonight, driving through the city she had once sworn to protect as an officer and now protected as an attorney, Imani allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Leonard King was headed to trial. Jalen Moore had lost everything he had valued. Terence Grant would finally face accountability. And somewhere a teenager who might have been the next Malik Carter would walk through the doors of that youth center and learn that they had rights, that they mattered, that justice, however delayed and imperfect, was still possible. She thought about the missing body cam footage, the staged supervisor units, the redacted emails, suggesting corruption reaching higher than anyone had yet proven. Unfinished business threads to pull cases to build the Johnson civil suit, still mired in discovery disputes, the city's lawyers fighting every document request. Every interrogatory stretched out the process, designed to wear down families, to make them give up or settle for pennies they did not deserve. Mrs. Johnson had already told Imani Brooks she'd fight this until her last breath. She would fight this until her last breath, until everyone knew what really happened to her son during that traffic stop. The Johnson family's wrongful death claim faced motions to dismiss that would take months to resolve. Each case was a small front in a larger war, each victory incremental, each setback temporary. This was the reality of systemic change, not explosive revelations, but grinding attrition. Not heroes who fixed everything, but ordinary people who refused to quit. But that was tomorrow's fight. Tonight, Imani had survived. She had won, and she would live to fight another day. The traffic light ahead turned red. She stopped, waiting in the glow of tail lights and street lamps, surrounded by a city that never slept and never stopped generating the conflicts she had dedicated her life to resolving. Her phone buzzed one more time, another case referral, another family desperate for help, another officer who needed to learn that the badge wasn't a shield against accountability. The light turned green. She pressed the accelerator and drove forward into whatever came next, carrying Malik Carter's laugh in her memory and Shanice Carter's gratitude in her heart, and the weight of unfinished justice on her shoulders. Ahead, somewhere in the darkness, the next battle waited. Imani Brooks, former officer defense attorney. Guardian of truths the system wanted buried, drove toward it without hesitation. Justice was slow, justice was incomplete. Justice broke your heart repeatedly, but justice once started was impossible to stop. Every step a black woman took was a chapter of grit and power. Keep walking tall. Thank you for being here.